Last week, we got an email from one of our viewers asking that we cover something green, do a green story, some sort of something that ties into the environment and whatnot. And I ran across this headline on BBC that I thought was interesting. Young couples trapped in car dependency.
Okay.
Interesting. So what it talks about, and we see it here in the United States, we see it here a lot in California, but probably anywhere where the populace is spread out in a lot of rural areas, right? So what's going on in the UK, this was a UK story, is that there's a lot of developments that go up on outskirts of town along major roads, with ringways or motorways and so forth. And what happens, and they're there because it provides kind of entry-level housing for maybe young couples, right?
Sure.
The problem is, if you want to go to the store, you get in your car and you get on the freeway and drive to the store.
Yeah.
When you take your kids to the school, you get in your car, get on the freeway, drive them to school. Anything you're going to do, you get in your car, get on the freeway and drive to school, because there's absolutely zero services, retail or any other kind of services near these developments. Now, what this causes, obviously, is number one, it's a fair amount of stress. You're moving to your new home, that's awesome, but now you're finding all your time spent in your car because absolutely anything you have to do involves driving. So it's kind of stressful, but also if you think about it, it's not good for the environment. So you're doing all this excess driving just to run small little errands. And also it leads to congestion on the freeway, so it adds to traffic and so forth. So they're really studying this in the UK and trying to come up with some sort of solution to this. And the obvious solution is that when developers build towns, they actually build them with people in mind, not just for homes, right? Or as they say, don't build it with the car in mind, build it with the people in mind. And so they're actually developing communities now that have like a town square as part of the development, where you can have retail space. You can have a store, a retail store, grocery store. You can have a pub or a bar. You can have a restaurant. You can have a retail area that's more kind of like a central square, like you might get in a town that is organically grown, right? But they're actually being built this way in some areas. And it makes a lot of sense because, again, if you're keeping the customer in mind, in this case the customer is the house buyer, they want more than a house. They really want a community. And a community involves being able to do something like walk downtown to get a pint of beer at the pub, or to do your grocery shopping, or to have schools right there, not constantly be driving. So this is kind of an environment story. It's a green story, but it's also a customer story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you say that, and I'm like thinking, well, I live in California, so I know all about getting in your car and doing anything. I mean, actually, California probably was, in some senses, kind of the first area that really had this issue, where, because Californians don't like to build up. Californians don't like multi-level dwellings. They like to spread out. So you have a lot of places that are kind of remote, and you don't have really a city center. You just need to drive everywhere. So that's an issue with California. Here in our town, in Chico, we are seeing more of these intentional communities, kind of these cultured communities that you talk about, that didn't really grow organically so much, but are now being developed with mixed use in mind, where you have people that would have, like you say, would have retail, would have some apartment buildings, would have some single family dwellings, would have some restaurants and entertainment, all within biking or walking distance, so you can get away from having to use the car all the time. It makes a lot of sense. It also makes sense for the happiness of your consumer, if you think about it. I mean, living in Chico, which is a smaller city, but it's still a city, I have to drive to work. When I come here to the studio, I drive. There have been times where I've been able to bike to my work here in town, which has been great.
It's great.
It's awesome, It just makes your whole day different. When you go in the morning and you've biked in, and now you got a little exercise, you're feeling great. You weren't cooped up in your car listening to Rush Limbaugh, which is depressing to begin with. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's a whole different element of getting your day started. And then going home after that, you bike home or you walk up. I mean, it's the way life used to be. And yeah, maybe it's cultured as opposed to organic, but I think it's the way more people probably want to live their life.
And you mentioned mixed use. We're even seeing this a lot more in developments in town too, where rather than just have an apartment building and then you have your other businesses, where you're seeing more in Sacramento, quite a bit of this is going on, is kind of the lower level is shops, and then right above the shops is condos or apartments or whatnot. And it's kind of that same idea. What you see a lot, I think, on the East Coast, certainly in Europe, is where everything is within walking distance. And in California, that's really a strange. You're right. We're not used to walking everywhere.
No.
But I mean, this is like I say, I like this story because it's both an environmental issue and it's also a customer issue. When a developer is building a development, they should be looking at more than just building homes. That's important. Affordable housing is important. But you got to look at the entire experience because that's also going to attract buyers.
Yeah.
If you can attract them to a place that not only are we giving you a home that you can afford because it's on the outskirts of town, but we're also giving you an environment where you feel like you're in a town. You feel like you're in a community.
Well, and it's interesting. This pendulum has swung here in America, for instance, and maybe in Europe too, but certainly here in America, where you kind of go back and forth between the urban and the suburban life. Rural kind of stays the way it is in many cases, but
right.
People were initially 100 years ago, many people lived in these cities, right? And in the urban cores, you'd have a million people living within a couple dozen blocks in Lower Manhattan, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But I mean, then there was this fleeing away from that, and then the urban cores got hollowed out, and there was a lot of empty storefronts and the like, and people want to live in the suburbs. Now people are saying, well, the suburbs ain't all they're cracked up to be.
Right.
The millennials really do enjoy city living many times because there's so much there. There's so much vibrancy to things to do. There's art and there's music and there's food and there's all within walking distance.
All within walking, you get it, or biking.
Or biking or public transportation.
Yep.
I mean, you talk about Europe, they do a great job in Europe of public transportation that we don't here in America. People in America like their cars.
Yeah.
And when it ties into the green thing about, what are we doing to contribute to these problems we're having? If indeed the problems that we're having with climate change have to do with carbon, you should try to drive less, right? But you try to drive less anyway because it's better for your body and it's better for your pocketbook, right?
Exactly. When gas is $4 a gallon,
it's better, and you want to walk anyway, or you want to ride your bike. It keeps your belly down and keeps your pocketbook fat. So it's a good thing all around, regardless of how you feel about climate change, to try to drive less if you can.
Right.
And that's what I think this story is all about.
And thanks to Carl DePolt for. So hey, if you have ideas for stories you want us to cover, just go ahead and email them to us at qdl@qualitydigest.com.
Yeah, we're gonna try to do this every week, where we do a little rip from the headline story, where we just kind of throw one at each other. So yeah, send this to us.